pace of change is accelerated because every time we learn something new, we kind of then look introspectively and go, might we need to change something with what we're doing? Because it's not always, do we need to start something new? Sometimes it's, what might we need to change?
Welcome to Moving Mountains, a podcast where we get to celebrate together the wins that different churches and the church as a whole have experienced. I'm Pam Flannery, and each month I get the amazing opportunity to talk with church leaders from all over the country, hearing the innovative and creative ways they're reaching their communities through the struggles and the wins in their ministry. Our hope is that you'll leave each episode with fresh ideas for your ministry, as well as the tools to put that plan into action so that you can impact your community further. Let's move mountains. Hi, my name is Pam Flannery. I lead our customer communities at Pushpay. Today, I have the honor to introduce you to Morgan Teruel, online campus manager with Sandals Church in Riverside, California, who plays a key role in the success of this online community. Morgan, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to meet with us and share your wisdom and your insights. I am so excited for our listeners to hear what goes on behind the scenes at Sandals Church to make such an incredible online experience. So thank you. I would love for you to share about yourself, your background, your journey. Share all that with us.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start back a little bit. I'm not from California, but I came out to California in 2010 to study at college out here, met my husband out here, planted roots out here. That's the last decade plus summed up in a few sentences. During that time, so my husband actually started going to Sandals before they even had their own building. And he's the one that kind of introduced me to it. I started going in around 2014 and have been going since then. I started out volunteering within worship. That was like my first love. Then began working there as a worship leader in 2018. Obviously, COVID struck us all in 2020. And around that time, we assembled an online campus team. And so I moved over from the worship world into the digital world and started out in the online campus at that time. And I've been there since.
Oh, was that a hard transition? Because I know as a worship leader, yeah, that must be hard.
Yes, it was like, I tell people there's like a mourning process, which sounds very dramatic, probably like typical worship leader, a little drama, right? But there was a mourning experience, but it's actually, God's been really good to me because he's given me opportunity to still serve in a way in which I feel like I'm supposed to, while also doing the digital strategies and being on this side. I'm just not paid for that like I was at that time. And I'm totally cool with that. And in fact, I think it's an honor to be able to serve in that way. So still get to.
You're amazing at what you do now. I can only imagine what type of worship leader you were, because I just see your heart and everything you do. I love that. Pastor Y was a guest on episode 7 of our Moving Mountains podcast, and he spoke about church anywhere. And he shared how to create an amazing experience where churches can connect and engage their community through church management software, digital giving, custom app. I highly recommend our listeners check that podcast out. You will be so encouraged. And Pastor Jeff is you just feel like you're his BFF when you first meet.
Oh, yeah.
He's so warm and wonderful. He came from Hollywood and that, the whole world of acting and voices. And he's just wonderful. He's very inspiring. And he shared so many helpful insights. And now we get to hear from you what happens behind the scenes. He spoke about this amazing team that he has, and you're one that makes that happen through the metrics and the reports that you pull bi-weekly, I believe. I want you to share about that.
Sure.
Why is this process that you guys have created? Tell us about how this process came about and what has made Sandals one of the most effective, if not the most effective hybrid churches in the country. So Morgan, would you share with our audience just kind of that system that you and your team have created and what happens in those bi-weekly meetings? I loved when you shared with me. I was like, oh, this is so good. I want pastors and leaders all over the country to hear this. So please share.
Sure. First, I have to say, I cannot take credit for all of the things I'm about to share. I have been a contributor, but I have not been the only one that's put work into this. In fact, sometimes some of the people I'd be working with, like they would pitch an idea and it would even take me a couple weeks to understand the idea that they were pitching. But I can start by sharing, the heart of reporting and metrics. It's like, ultimately, we're not looking for like numbers because we know what's behind the number, and we care about what's behind the number more than the number itself. And I'm sure many churches can resonate with that. It's like numbers are sort of the necessary evil that we have to go about to collect information and data and make decisions and change and all of that. But sort of the question we've been trying to answer over probably the last, I'll say 3 years specifically, although I'm sure it was a thought before that, is maybe first, can discipleship happen digitally? If so, which we believe we can, if so, how then do we measure it, and how do we know that it is happening in fact? And I think that, we've been trying to sort of cope with living in ambiguity in the last couple of years, while also trying to sort of carve out a path in the uncharted territory. And really, in probably the last, I think it's been about 9 months or so. It was last August. So however much time has passed since then, August of 2022 is when we first started getting an idea out of the gray zone and into writing of how we might measure digital discipleship. And the idea sort of came from first looking at our funnel. So we look at a funnel in terms of our crowd being at the top, maybe people that are just consuming content here and there. Maybe it's a TikTok clip. It may not even be content in the sense of a sermon. And then we look at then our congregation. So people that would maybe watch a 40-minute sermon. And then we look at our core. So these are people that would take steps of like going into a community group or serving on a team or getting baptized, people that are taking a step that's more active and less passive. So in looking at our crowd, our congregation, and our core, we decided to be very strategic in the content that we released and the experiences we provided for each of them. And then out of that, we wanted to begin basically measuring on a curve. When we have our meetings, we are looking at probably 20-ish pieces of data at these biweekly meetings. But when we combine some of them together, what we're looking at is, what does the curve look like of who is involved in our crowd, our congregation, and our core? And based on the stuff that we're doing, are all of those moving upwards, knowing that we're going to have less people in our core than our crowd and being okay with that, but selecting the shape of a curve that we like and then measuring the movement of that curve based on those 3 sections on a biweekly basis. And so this is relatively new for us. At first, we started calling it like the distribution of attention curve, but I guess we just felt like that was kind of nerdy. So we changed it. And it's more of a discipleship or formation, momentum, movement. I don't know if we've officially landed on a title, but we have different metrics that we collect that will tell us, here's our measurement for our crowd. So I'll give you the example for each one. And if I'm nerding out here, just bear with
love
me.
it. Nerd out.
Okay. So for our crowd, the number that we're paying most attention to is our reach number. We do look at other things within that, like engagement within the posts that we do, but this is non-sermon content only. We're not looking at sermon content with our crowd. We're looking at everything else. And so this could be anything from, like I mentioned, a TikTok clip, which sometimes they go viral and sometimes they have like 100 views on them. You just sort of never know with TikTok. We could look at anything from that to Pastor Fredo Ramos doing a video on what's it like to practice simplicity in a world of complexity. He just released one last week. And so it's not a sermon, but it is spiritual in nature. Our TikTok clip could be like a meditation Monday. And I can talk through some more of what these things are, but anything that's reached anyone and is not a sermon is what we're looking at there. For our congregation, what we look at primarily right now is what we're calling watch time. So we look at this across platforms. The one that gives us the best access to the clearest data is YouTube, which is great because that happens to be where a lot of people like to go. And we look at how many people are watching 40 minutes of sermon content. And this could be current sermon. This could also be any historical sermon. And we have over 400 historical sermons that live on that platform. And so we collect that data and report how many 40-minute views have we watched, because that helps us tell the story. Like going to a live campus, you might sit down for about 40 minutes. And so we try and come up with an equal kind of storyteller to share. Okay, well, then this is about our congregation size. Our last piece is our core. And for that, we look at this number we kind of invented, which sounds a little strange, but we call it our giving equivalent attendance number. And this is what we look at for our core. So we look at how much was given in the last month, and then divide that by the average giving per family at a campus. And the reason we do that is, again, we're trying to kind of make sense of it all to people that are used to the live campus experience. So by saying, okay, this is how much giving came in, which might equate to this number of families or individuals. So we're going to go with this is our core. And what we're looking at through the content that we release and the experiences we create is for not just one of those numbers to grow, the crowd, the congregation, or the core, but really to see all of them continue to move up and up in that kind of curve visual, so that we know we're not just reaching people with funny clips on TikTok. Like if that spikes, but our congregation doesn't move and our core doesn't move, we are not discipling people. But if we see our crowd begin to move up based on the releases of things, and then we see our congregation maybe lag a little bit behind, but they start going up a little bit too, and then we see our core also affected, then we believe that there is formation happening, that there is digital discipleship happening. So that's our nerdy way of figuring it out. This is like somewhat fresh, but it's probably the first time we feel like we've actually got a way to describe it, to measure it. And it's our baseline now. So we're using that for the time being, and it's always up to change. But for now, this is what we're using. We're going to stick with it for a little bit.
Well, you're doing an incredible job. So it's working. Yeah. And
Okay,
I love that your heart is, like you said, discipleship.
Mhm.
Are we truly discipling? Because, it's
Yeah.
one thing to have sermons online, right? It's one thing to put content out there, but how do we measure the impact that we're making? Tell us about the different services that you distribute and the nuances within them.
Totally. So when it comes to our sermons, you probably remember, it's not even that long ago, there was a time where it felt like the contemporary church, like there was a chasm divided between the traditional church liturgy and then this new contemporary church with this like rock and roll music. And then you would see churches where they would have a 9 a.m. traditional service and an 11 a.m. contemporary. And we're kind of living in that age now, but maybe a new iteration of it. So we have some different audiences that we distribute our sermons to, and we try and package them in a way that will meet the needs of that audience the best. So if I think of the closest thing we might have to a more quote unquote traditional audience now, it would be our simulated live services that happen at specific times on the weekend. So we have 4 services between Saturday and Sunday, and they happen at the same time. Like if you would go to a classic church service, you know exactly what time you're going. You typically know a couple people that are going to be there, and we have that for online. So that service gets more worship than our YouTube service. That service gets more hosting than our YouTube service, and they get some live interaction with real people at that time. If you kind of go into the other direction, there's a couple things in between, but then we have like something like our YouTube audience, which they may just be stumbling upon this. There may have not been intention in finding sandals, but maybe it popped up as like a suggested video. One time we met somebody, actually he was in Italy, and he was watching a Queen music video, and popping up on the suggested videos was Pastor Matt Brown preaching something. And that was how he found sandals. It's like, I do not understand that algorithm whatsoever. But thank the Lord. I mean, he ended up becoming a believer, and we've met him, and just a crazy story. Very, very cool.
Love that story.
Isn't that cool? But he found us through suggested video. And someone like that, especially if they aren't a traditional churchgoer or having that background, something like 3 different sets of hosting in a service, or 4 worship songs, or sort of these things that we've become accustomed to as the Western church or American church, may not really be comfortable for other people. So for those services, we try and keep it as simple as possible. We call it the YouTube message only version. And it's really that. It's a message only. There's not worship included. There's links to other things if people want to check it out and explore, but we try and keep it simple. Those are the most people that we see on any given week and weekend are the ones watching our YouTube message only. But it's a slightly different experience than if you look at the spectrum, our simulated live, at a certain same time, same place kind of thing.
It's very creative. You guys are doing it. I just love it. So tell us about the micro gathering. You shared that with a little bit. Can you explain to our listeners what that is? And
Yeah.
how you disciple through that micro gathering?
Absolutely. This has been an experiment for us also that launched in 2020. They were like thinking about it in 2018, 2019. And then the need arose in 2020 where people all of a sudden were obviously lonely, didn't have community. Most people couldn't meet in a church building. And so we call our micro gathering Sandals Church Anywhere. And in 2020, it started out as this house church model where we would find and sift and interview and find the right people in any location. So we have people nationally and internationally that have opted into this, and they have then put on their own Sandals Church gathering in their home, which is so cool. A lot of them still meet to this day. And so we're actually going to visit one in Melbourne, Australia this summer. They started in 2020. They have probably 8 to 12 people that gather on the week. They watch the sermon together. They worship together. So it's this beautiful example of like kind of going back to the basics, like a house church, like we read about in Acts. I mean, it's still a modernized version, obviously, but they're meeting, they're going through discipleship themselves in a small community. And we are kind of the ones that resource, support, and shepherd them. So discipleship in that environment could look different from gathering to gathering. But if we think about I think about our Sandals Church Anywhere in South Carolina. So they're like in the Spartanburg area, and we've gotten to know the leaders of that gathering really well. They're wonderful, wonderful people. We've gone out to see them. They've come out to see us, and they've baptized people since being a Sandals Church Anywhere. They have like maybe 6 to 8 kids that are coming up in the Sandals Church Anywhere. They've sent a couple out to the mission field over the last couple years. Like they're doing it. And part of it, like we are honored to just support and resource them. This is also just kind of they're self-starters. They are taking initiative and they love the Lord, and they are looking for any opportunity to lead other people to him or further along others in their journey as they are also pursuing growth themselves.
It's so special. 2020, you think about vision, right? 2020 is perfect vision. What I have heard from so many pastors across the country, and especially Sandals, the creativity that has come out of the tragedy of COVID, right? It was such it just spun all of our world, and we had to do church differently. And I see how you optimize the opportunity, and it's really, it's very encouraging. And you continue to do that. It isn't like, okay, well, we're back in the services, we're back in the church doors are open, let's kind of stop what we've done, but rather you progressed in that, which is really great.
We're seeing that effect, like even in the last 3 years, like the pace of change is accelerated. It is wildly quick. If we thought it was fast before, it's like 10 speed now. And so even something like our Sandals Church Anywhere model over the last 3 years, we're seeing the need for it to change even now. Even though it feels like we just started this and we just launched it, we're realizing, okay, well, this isn't 2020 anymore. And it was great in that time. And what has come to life, let's keep nurturing it. But what might we need to change and evolve in order to get the gospel further, and get discipleship going at a pace that we can keep like putting fuel on the fire. So we're seeing that ourselves too.
Yeah. What are some ways that y'all keep up with that, pace of technology?
Totally. So one way that I guess, I don't know if keep up, I feel like we're just running the race, with it's not just technology, but it's like the evolution of what we do. We're always reading culture. And by that, like that could mean a million things. We're listening to podcasts, we're reading articles. One of the ones that struck me the most in the last probably 3 months was the YouTube Culture and Trends report from 2022. This thing was a beast. I looked at this and learned so much about, like, they had 3 different kinds of creativity outlined and what that looks like on YouTube. And I forget what all of them were, but some of them were like responsive creativity or community creativity. And all of these things, this was nothing to do with churches. This was just how people use YouTube, what has been successful, what's trending. And so by looking at that and seeing, kind of asking even the Lord, like, Lord, help us to find our way through this. How might we capitalize on the things that are trending, the methods that might work for other people in other areas, would the church maybe have a place in that? And if so, how can we do that? How can we remain relevant? So looking at studies, another one that we look at is the Google year end. It's like the Google year end summary where they tell you the most Googled things of the last year. So one of those recently played into a sermon series that we did that was called How to Pray. And even the sermon series name, How to Pray, aligned with how people Google search, because oftentimes they'll start that Google search with how to blank. And so we saw a lot of newcomers to that, just even based on the titling of our sermon series. And so we're constantly trying to reculture, and we're always having these very like in the clouds conversations with each other. Like someone from the digital media team will send us an article and be like, hey, what did you think of Vice's latest article on blah, blah, blah? And so then we're kind of going da, 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 da. Like there's a email thread with 20 emails on it. And then 3 days later, someone else will be like, hey, did you read that Target article about how they're maximizing their online shopping and their hybrid model? This was an ebook that came out, I think last year, and it was incredible, affected us greatly. And so then we're reading a new article on Target that's like 35 pages long and sharing our findings with each other. And so it's actually very exciting, but it's also feels like there's a moving target then constantly too, because as we learn more, like I mentioned, that pace of change is accelerated, because every time we learn something new, we kind of then look introspectively and go, might we need to change something with what we're doing? Because it's not always, do we need to start something new? Sometimes it's, what might we need to change? What might we need to shift? And sometimes it's a broad mentality shift, and sometimes it's a more practical one. But we try to remain pretty open to letting things die that need to die, and then starting new things and experimenting.
That's so key, because sometimes we can get in a rut, especially in ministry, where we don't stop to say, what should we let die? Many times I've asked people, well, why do you do that? Well, because we've always done it, but why?
Totally.
And there's no why. It's just something that maybe through tradition, or it was a good idea 50 years ago. So I appreciate that you look at that as well. How do you and your team identify those who want to grow past that online experience? And how do you support people who are tenders rather than viewers? Because you talked about the difference there. So how do you support them?
Like the core of our group. So in terms of identifying, this is a challenge I wouldn't say we've solved, but we have discovered new ways of doing it. And sometimes it's just the Holy Spirit moving in a person, and they will reach out to us and we'll begin a relationship there. But we do almost have to wait for people to self-identify first, so that they're not a random IP address, but they're actually a person, even if that's a person that we know as a username on something. And so what we'll do is, like, people that engage back with us, we then, like, we don't let that go. So someone will comment on YouTube, we are commenting back. We are trying to begin some sort of relationship, cultivate and see what might be there, because they have in some way, shape, or form self-identified and said, I at least want you to know my opinion on this, or my thought on this, or my question. We do the same thing with Instagram, with TikTok, with all of our platforms, is we engage back with anyone that comments. And we don't actually do it as Sandals Church. Sometimes we're doing it from our personal accounts, because we want people to know there are real people behind these interactions. I can share one really cool example that happened in 2022. I think it was in January of that year. And there was a girl that emailed us just our general online email address and said, like, hey, I've been watching from France. I've been so encouraged by what you guys have done, and like, just want to know, is there anything else I could do to further my walk with Jesus?
Wow.
Like, if there's not that, like, that's the most open door kind of email someone could send. And so I reached out to her, and we began to, she turns out to be around my age. She's a school teacher in France, no family, no friends that are believers. In fact, it's a very atheistic environment where she's in. And so she has come to the Lord all based on the work of the Holy Spirit and watching sermons. She found Pastor Rick Warren, and then watched a sermon. Pastor Matt popped up as another suggested video. She really resonated with his style and just kept watching. And so we start meeting every other week. We're going through the book of John, and just like friend to friend, kind of trying to build this like virtual friendship. And it's working. She spoke great English. I speak a little French. So we were able to kind of figure it out. And as we're going through the book of John, we start reading about baptism. And she goes, I think that might be something I want to do. I might have been baptized as a baby. I don't even know. But I think this is something I would love to do. And I'm like, well, we've got to make that happen. Absolutely. Like, let's figure this out. So I'm like, do I know anyone in France that might be able to do this? Is she nearby any churches? I start asking her, and we're just getting to know each other. We kind of came to the conclusion, like, I think we've got to go. There's no one that's out there right now that could baptize her. She doesn't have a friend that's a believer. She doesn't have any family members that are believers. So 4 of us went out there last August and we baptized her. And
I have chills.
Isn't it incredible?
It's so incredible.
I mean, obviously not a dry eye in the room. And she has to sort of remain anonymous, but she let us film part of her story from like the back of her head and just anonymous angles. So we got to capture her baptism, and now we're sharing that. And here's the really cool part, Pam. This is a little bit away from your question, or maybe just elaborating, but she and I started a community group and invited other girls that we know that are international. And so we have a gal from Uganda that's in our virtual group. We have a gal that lives in Germany, a couple from the UK. And this past maybe February or March, the girl from Germany is like, you know what? I think I want to get baptized. So guess who's baptizing her this fall?
I know exactly who's baptizing her this fall.
Our friend from France.
Yes.
So the one that got baptized is now baptizing. And it's just like, yes, so that is a very special story. That is not everybody, obviously, but you sort of never know what's going to come from an email, what's going to come from an engagement on YouTube or TikTok, or like, I would have never thought just from one email exchange that we would be this far down the journey, and that I would have such the honor and the privilege to be a part of it. And so when we talk about how do we meet people, we just kind of go where the Lord shows us. We find the momentum and we try and capitalize on it in whatever way we can. And so for our friend in France, that's what that journey looked like. And we're just praying for more of that.
Wow. What a beautiful ripple effect of discipleship. You can just see the ripple effect, like you saw in the book of Acts. Actually, someone who used to work here, he goes to France every year, and there's missionaries that are over there. So we can talk offline if you'd like me to help them connected, because I think that it's so wonderful to have an online church and to have connection like that. But I don't know, there's something about that in-person connection as well, at least for me, maybe because I'm a connector.
100%. No, I think you're right. And we even saw that with our friends. So she and I had met, and we'd been talking about deep things over the course of 6 months or so. But when we went out there, and I brought a couple people from our digital media team with me, it was a whole different kind of connection that we got to have with her. I mean, it accelerated the sort of familial and community sense that you get. I'm still all for live gatherings as much as possible, as much as I am for digital. I think God's just using both. And so the more we lean into that, like, we might get to see more and more fruit.
And here's where, I mean, I see technology all over this. And I also see like for instance, I'm not putting a plug for Pushpay here, but like the reporting, when, like sometimes I'll hear people say, well, do we really need to take attendance? But that attendance matters, right? Like you said, numbers represent people. And as churches take attendance and they run those reports, whether it's a first-time guest, second-time guest, there's so many reports that you can create, and those represent lives. And that's what you guys have done. You've taken those reports that you pull every other week, and then from there you have created such an amazing experience for people. It is an experience, but it's discipleship. And I hear that too. I think a lot of churches struggle to really define what does discipleship look like in the church, where we're able to connect personally. So now add on this hybrid experience of connecting and effective, not just connecting, but effective discipleship. So I really appreciate all that you do. What words of encouragement would you give to other leaders regarding the hybrid church? Maybe they're just starting out, or maybe they've done it for a while, but they're frustrated, or now they're listening to what you've said saying, wow, there's so much more we could do. What would you say to them?
I really would say, like, don't be afraid to experiment and live in the ambiguity of it all, because you might not know the right direction right away. We still don't. We are still experimenting constantly. But if it's experimentation that's been prayed for, if experimentation is led by good shepherds, good leaders with humility, if it's missional, if your heart is right in that pursuit, then I think that leads you to sort of being able to creatively adapt to this world. And also, if you're humble, then you have the humility to let something go that is ready to let go. And I think that those are things that we are trying to still put into practice. And so I'm speaking this to myself as much as I am as an encouragement for others, is experiment, keep charting forward in the waters, and also let go of the things that are old when they need to be let go of. And if you're not sure what those are, give them to God and he'll tell you. Like, he'll be clear. That's what I would say.
That's excellent advice for each one of us, even in our personal lives with everything, right? Be willing to let go of things and allow. Earlier, we spoke about the creativity of the Holy Spirit. He's, God is creator. And when we rely on him to show us his creative ideas like you guys have done, I hope everyone experiences a Sandals online experience, because it is so good.
Thank you.
Feel connected. I literally felt connected, especially through COVID, being a few states away, but clicking on and feeling like, wow, I just feel like they know me, and
that's awesome.
You guys are engaging, and you're not. One thing that you said too that I really appreciate is everything that you put out there, every content that goes out, you're commenting, you're following up. It's not just out there and then, okay, well, hopefully people see it, but there's an engagement that's happening. And I think that's critical. I want to make an impact on people's lives. Morgan, before we close today, thank you again for your time. It's just always encouraging for me to hear from all of you, because you're amazing. My favorite. Can you tell us a little bit about Easter this year? And
absolutely,
I think that'll inspire so many of our listeners.
Yeah. So Easter was really fun this year because we got to do some new experimentation. I mentioned earlier in the interview about that YouTube Culture and Trends report from 2022. And a piece that came from that really stuck with us was this kind of landing point and conclusion that said, the best way we can connect to Gen Z and any other generation for that matter are through their communities, their formats, and their moods. And this struck me because I see that happening on TikTok. I feel like TikTok knows my mood before I even share it. But we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we, knowing that this is an experience, Easter may be a time of year where someone tries out church that they wouldn't try another time, right? We're all putting our best foot forward on Easter, right? And so when it came to the digital experience, I was really intrigued by that mood item in particular. And I also heard some of the brainstorming that was happening with our weekend team of what are we thinking about doing at live campuses? What is Pastor Matt thinking about preaching about? And there was a link between the two that we found and kind of birthed some new ideas. So part one of Pastor Matt's teaching, he did sort of a 3-part thing this past Easter, was on the humanity of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And what better place to discover a mood than through our own humanity, right? Like, we experience the full spectrum of moods, maybe even in one day. And so knowing that that's where the sermon was going to begin, we wanted to, in the way that we could, through the platforms that we could, create this digital experience that was sort of a choose your own adventure walkthrough, but based on the mood you were in. So we prompted people in our digital experience this year by first asking, how are you feeling? And they were able to opt in, I think it was 12 different moods. And based on the mood that they chose, it was going to take them to a different starting place for the sermon, where Pastor Fredo met them, digitally met them in that mood, spoke to them where they were at, and then led into the sermon where we started with Pastor Matt talking about the humanity of Jesus in the garden. And this was really cool. It actually showed us some interesting data too. So we had 4 emotions that were more subsets of kind of anger. And we saw more than twice the amount of people opt into those 4 emotions than we did the others, which I think the 4 were like angry, irritable, apathetic, or frustrated. And we saw more people choose those, double the amount of people than any of the other 8. And those 8 were sort of subsets of sad or subsets of happy. And that was really interesting to us. It led us to think even maybe people feel more of the chasm from like the polarity of culture and the polarity of so much that's happened over the last couple of years. Maybe more than loneliness, they actually feel really frustrated. And maybe there's a healing opportunity in there. So we're still kind of brainstorming with what that might mean in terms of what we do next. But the Easter experience was really cool this year. And it was just fun to try something new while also being aligned and collaborating well with the other teams at Sandals. And we felt really excited about it and just what we were able to learn from it and what the teams put out there. So it was a really fun experience.
Morgan, I went online and I clicked one of the emotions and I was like, this is so different. And it was such a great experience. At first, I thought, well, why do we care about people's moods? It's huge. I've never heard a church speak about this before until you shared it with me. I reposted it on social media and people started clicking on, some caught it, but then was it taken down? Because I had friends say, I don't
could
see
check
it.
on that. Yeah. I need to check. I looked last week, but if it is on there, it's sandalschurch.com/Easter online. But I can check and get back with you offline.
Maybe it was the Easter online that people didn't go because I just put Sandals online because at the time they could just go to Sandals online. So that's repeat that again for our listeners because I want them to experience this.
Totally. Sandalschurch.com/Easter online.
And will the mood still be available as well for them to choose?
Yes. Yeah. If that landing page is up, then we've got it all. It was really cool too. We did a marketing campaign around moods, and I'll send those to you offline as well. But this was really interesting. We saw crazy numbers on these ads. We did a couple non-skippable ads that were 15 seconds or less, and they captured those different moods. And I think did correlate into some people watching. We don't know the one-to-one on that, but we saw some really, really interesting data come through on the marketing campaign. I'll make sure that landing page is up and whoever's listening can walk through that experience and give it a shot.
Do you think you'll do that again after there had to be so much work that went into that? Because I know I clicked on several moods and it was very special for that particular mood. It was generic. It was right to the heart of how you're feeling. I thought another genius way of how you connected with people where they are, which is really special.
We may try something like that again. I don't know. I'm sort of open to seeing what do we learn in these next few months and seasons and where does that take us? I also wonder if technology may begin to make something like that easier because part of the hard work was figuring out, okay, if this is how we're doing it, how do we make this work on every platform? Because every platform interacts differently with the consumer, the viewer. So the way we could do it on YouTube had to be different than the way we did it for simulated live service, which had to be different from the way we put it up on our app. And it was like, okay, this is getting really complicated. So we had to make crazy complex distribution strategies. But I think with that said, looking at the value over the work that we put in, that kind of ROI concept in the business world, I think we'd definitely be open to trying again. I don't think our team would be up for doing it every week by any means, but if we saw value in that coming again, we absolutely would try it. And who knows how technology may progress and make that less complicated on the distribution side, but we're open-handed.
Did you have the mood choices on your app?
We had the app linked to the landing page. So the landing page that was created was friendly both for desktop and mobile as well as tablet. And so it was a slightly different look on the phone, but it was available that way. So we opted people and sent them that way.
I just love what y'all are doing. I really do. And I'm a California girl born and raised there, third generation, but from the Bay Area. I know you're further south. And I know you guys, I can keep up. You keep adding campuses. You're going further north in Northern California, which is great to see. How many campuses do you currently have?
We have 14 right now.
Wow. Physical?
And we don't, well, we don't include our micro gatherings in that number, but 14 buildings, I guess you could say.
Yeah, you're growing. You're expanding the kingdom. It's exciting. Well, thank you, Morgan. It's always a joy to speak with you and connect with anyone at Sandals. You're all just wonderful. And I love your heart for people. You really have a heart. And if people have not listened to Pastor Matt Brown, go on there and listen to him. He's wonderful. The sermons are great. I tell people about Sandals all the time, especially for new believers, people who are searching, and they always respond with, I loved that sermon, or I felt so connected. That's a gift to be able to connect even in one line, isn't it? It's a gift.
Absolutely.
You guys are doing a great job. So thank you so much again for your time.
Thanks, Pam.
I appreciate you so much.
This has been Pushpay's Moving Mountain podcast, real talk from church leaders about overcoming challenges and growing their ministries. If you'd like to learn more about church staff or any of the features mentioned in our podcast, visit us at pushpay.com. Make sure you subscribe so that you can get notified whenever a new episode comes out. You don't want to miss out on any of these great conversations with amazing people. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.